waiting for more people to join, I will leave a question for you in the chat. Feel free to answer the question in writing, and we will speak about your answers later. So now, can you see is this? Yes. Okay. We have started recording this workshop. Just so you know, we will later on post this on our website and YouTube channels for people who couldn't attend in the end to be able to see it. I will welcome you again to this workshop on bullying, and I want you to see this workshop as an opportunity not only to hear from Carrie, who's the expert on the topic, but also participate and share your views, your opinions, your experiences, anything you want to share with the rest of the people. I'm pretty sure that any question that comes to your mind has come to the mind of another colleague as well in the past, or will come in the future. And every experience you had in the school when it comes to bullying or other types of behaviors we will discuss will appear in the professional lives of other colleagues as well in the future. As an introduction to today's webinar, I would like to present Sophia, and then I'll let Carrie present herself and Cultures of Dignity. So this workshop is a collaboration between us. I represent School of the Future International Academy. I am Natasha Nika. I am the project manager of the organization, and I'm also a teacher trainer. I wanted to speak to you very, very quickly about Sophia and what it is that we do. Sophia stands for School of the Future International Academy, but it's also the word for wisdom in Greek. And since our founder and president is Greek, he found it a good combination of what we try to send out in the educational community and the actual name of the organization. We do a variety of programs. I will very, very quickly speak to you about our two basic programs. I wanted to bring them to your attention. The first one is mentoring for school leaders. We have a program dedicated to school leaders from all over the world. So we provide them with the school self-assessment tool, which is a tool they can use to scan all the operations of their school and see what areas need improvement. And then we use the results of this assessment tool. We bring experts from all over the world, and we help school leaders progress and improve their operations. The next call for this program will be fall 2022. So feel free to share it with any school leader you feel or you know that needs help in order to be a part of the program. The second thing I wanted to speak to you about is Bridge the Gap. Bridge the Gap is our annual virtual online summit. This year is held on November 2nd, 2022. And it's focused on girls' inclusivity in education. So every year we try to speak about an area in education where we feel there is a gap and bring experts to tell us possible approaches, possible solutions to these problems. This year, for the first time, apart from the experts panel, we will be having a roundtable with teachers and students from all over the world who have faced and successfully addressed the problem of girls not attending schools in their community. This part of the event is is organized in partnership with the Varkey Foundation, and we're very happy with that collaboration. As well, we feel that Summit will have a lot to offer. Girls' exclusion of education is a problem that a lot of countries and communities face. So we are very happy to deal with it and open up the discussion. This is the speakers for this year's event. I'm just sharing them very quickly with you. We will share more about it very soon. So I will welcome now Carrie, and I will let her speak about her organization and their work. Me and Carrie have also recorded a podcast on environments of respect and dignity, school environments of dignity vs school environments of respect. I will leave the link to that podcast in the chat as well for those of you who haven't heard it. I think you will find it very interesting as well. So Carrie, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Natasha. My name is Carey Goldstein, and I live in Louisville, Kentucky, in the United States. And I work for a group called Cultures of Dignity. They are based in Colorado, but I was already working remotely before the world went remote, so it's worked out well. And I started working with Cultures of Dignity when I say retired, but when I left working as a school counselor for 15 years. So I was a middle school counselor for 11 years and then a high school counselor for 4 at the school where my children attended. So when they became freshmen, when my oldest came into the high school, we decided it was time to leave. But I've been working with Cultures of Dignity for about 6 or 8 years at that time, off and on, helping them with some curriculum. It was the first curriculum that I had used, the Owning Up curriculum, that I really resonated with my students. It's a very student-driven curriculum because we use students in all that we do. So we ask their opinions. We have student editors. We have a student advisory council, and we have interns. And so they help us edit and look at lesson plans and say, that's great, good job, or that is not so great. A student would never do that or never say that or react to that. They do it in a very gentle way, which is good, but they really help inform all that we do, which is one of the reasons why I think it resonates so well with students. And we work with schools and organizations all over the world. I've been lucky enough to work with schools in Argentina. I got to go to an American school in Ghana. And we just, in lots of schools in the United States. So we really try to help schools create what we call the culture of dignity. How do we let student voice be heard in the appropriate times and places? We also recognize there's time for rules and things like that. But how do we build that trust and those relationships and rapport and give teachers support to do that? Because oftentimes, in particular nowadays, administrators are expecting teachers to just be social emotional learning experts without providing a lot of support and training. So we hope to be that support and training at times. And then we do some blogs and podcasts and fun things like that as well. But really what we love the most is I love working with schools, and I like working with everybody within the school, the administrators, the teachers and the kids. And Natasha and I had a great time on our podcast together and had a good discussion. So we decided that today could be a fun collaboration and discussion together. And then what we set forth as a learning intentions was to define the difference between dignity and respect and their impact on communicating with young people. I want to define bullying, conflict, and drama, and a few other terms that sometimes get overused or misused. And then share concrete skills to increase adults' ability to support the emotional well-being of young people. So those are our goals for the day. Natasha, you're muted still.
Of course.
Of course.
Sorry for that. Thank you very much for this introduction. So can we start with first obvious question? What is the difference between school environments of respect vs school environments of dignity? How can we define and separate these two very different environments?
Right. And that's a common question that we get because we do kind of push or promote the idea of dignity versus respect. And if you could show the slide with the definitions, we'll define them first and how we define them. So we look at respect as we look back at its roots. Really, it's something that is earned. It is from the Latin word respectus, meaning to look back at. So respect is earned. And then dignity, if you look at its Latin roots, is dignitas, meaning to be worthy. And so respect is inherent. It is given. Everyone has the same amount, no more, no less. It doesn't matter on who you are or what you do or any of those things. Everybody has the same amount. It's inherent worth. So oftentimes we find that respect, where this work really came from is that we felt respect was being used within schools to be more about obey and obedience of respecting your elders or respect me just because I'm in this position. And I mentioned that we work with students. And I was doing something the other day and looking through our workbook, and I saw a quote that I had forgotten from one of our students when we asked them about the word respect. And she said, respect is supposed to be earned, but often it is imposed. And that was a student perspective. And I thought it was such a great way. And what we try to say a lot, because a lot of people, and I'll speak mostly for the United States, because we have a very strong, in certain parts of the country, particularly the South, it's respect your elders, kind of no matter what. Children are, don't speak until spoken to, and some of those phrases there. So we feel, though, that switching to dignity, because it is about more of behavior, that it separates the person from the behavior. When you say to respect someone, you're often talking about their position. You should respect your teachers, respect your elders, respect, positions of authority. So those are people that are attached to a position and not necessarily the behavior. And so what gets really tricky in schools sometimes is when we're using the word respect, which we're not saying don't use, or we're not saying take down from walls, because it's on a lot of walls and a lot of schools across the world. But maybe looking at it differently and attaching dignity to it as well. Because respect, we say to kids sometimes, if someone's mean to them, well, you don't have to be friends with them, but you have to respect them. And that gets a little tricky for kids, and it doesn't always make sense in their head of, well, why do I have to respect them? Though, if respect is earned, and that's how we're defining it, they didn't earn it. They've just treated me poorly. They haven't been kind to me. They've embarrassed me, those types of things. So we talk about switching it to dignity a little bit of, you don't have to respect them or their behaviors, but you have to treat them with dignity, meaning we don't get to retaliate. We don't get to start rumors. We don't seek revenge and those things. We don't get to do bad behavior back to that person. They're still a human being, and they still deserve and have earned or have inherent worth. They still are worth something. And I sometimes, depending on my audience, have used sort of the prison example, which I never know if it's the best example or not. But sometimes I feel like, people that get caught doing something bad go into the prison system, and they're already have things taken away from them, their families, their livelihood, their life, and for a good cause, because they did something wrong. But within that system, they still deserve to be treated with dignity. They don't deserve to be treated as less than human. They're already doing kind of their consequence. And not that schools are the same. That's a little bit of an extreme example, but it really resonated with a group of kids one time, and I've used it a few times. Yeah. Natasha, does that help, or do you want me to go deeper into that one for the moment?
No, I think it helps a lot. And we are launching the first poll for this workshop, because we wanted you to think, all of us in this meeting room. We wanted you to think whether you feel your school is respecting, to a certain extent, students' dignity as described by Carey, or you still fostered, or you fostered the idea of respect more than the idea of dignity. Maybe you don't really call it this way in your school, or maybe you don't use the terms, but do you feel that in your schools you respect students' dignity? Let's see what you think. We'll have the people replying little by little and see the results.
Okay. Just let me know. Right.
Yeah. We have 4 responses already, so we will let people, give it a little bit of thought. Okay, so moving on a little bit, and then how does the creation of going a little bit closer to today's topic, to bullying, how does the creation of particular environments can help us prevent instances of bullying in our schools?
Right. Well,
what do you think?
That is a question, and I think we even talked about it a little bit on the podcast. I'm always a little hesitant to say that we can completely prevent bullying. I definitely think it's a topic worth discussing, and that's why we talked about, having this be the focus today. I always say we need to be as proactive as possible, and we need to give kids skills on how to handle conflict and bullying and these things. But I also want to be careful before we get too deep into it to say that kids are always going to make mistakes. They are designed to make mistakes at this age, at really, really all of us are our whole lives, right? We would like to be more forgiven sometimes for the mistakes we make as an adult, but in particular, those middle school to high school years when they're developing so quickly and so many things are happening. Mistakes are going to happen, and unfortunately, some of those involve being mean or unkind, or even in some cases, bullying. Yes, we would like to prevent bullying from happening, but I'm not sure we completely can. And I used to have this discussion with my high school teachers. It felt as if sometimes they were really trying to eradicate any behavior issues. And I would kind of be the counselor in the background saying, well, hold on, if we did that, we probably have a bigger issue going on. We're not trying to create robots. Kids have to live through these mistakes. It is important for a child to, in many ways, for some children, they need to see the look on someone's face when they're not kind to them and feel that so that maybe they won't do it again, or feel how that feels to not do it to somebody else again. So some of these are painful yet life lessons. Now that's different than when we get into systematic, repetitive bullying. So I don't want to, make those sound like I'm saying it's okay to be a bully. I'm not saying that at all. I just think that we have to recognize and not set an expectation of perfection for many reasons. One, we won't meet it, and that's frustrating for us as teachers and educators. When I first started, my goal was I felt like I had to save everybody or fix every situation. And I had to let a little bit of that go and work on how to do the, kind of the best we can. The other one is if we set up an expectation of perfection for children, that there is to be no instances where things go wrong or they misbehave or make a mistake, they're still going to make those mistakes. We're just going to hear about them less and less. They're going to become more underground. They're going to feel like it is they shouldn't share, or they will be shamed. It kind of turns into that other piece about that. That means that they're a bad person, not that maybe they did something bad and they can apologize and move forward. It means something more about them. So that is a little bit of why we have to be careful of saying we can completely prevent. And what do we want to do to make them less happen less often and maybe less severe when those things do happen? Let's keep it in the normal range rather than going off to like severe bullying. So a lot of times shifting the conversation from respect to dignity really starts to help kids feel seen, heard, and valued. And honestly, I think that was a phrase, Natasha, that we said a couple times on the podcast, that I hadn't really put it in those three before, but it feels really good to say dignity helps you feel seen, heard, and valued, because it prevents us from asking a kid to respect somebody that was really unkind to them and does not deserve their respect. And it opens up communication. You can explain the differences between the words, and you can say, and so I get it that you don't respect them right now. Hopefully they can earn that respect back, but you really have to treat them with dignity moving forward, regardless of maybe how they've treated you. So the kids can understand that piece of it. And there's also that window open of maybe that other child, they were doing something wrong, but maybe they hopefully, let's hope, right, that we all learn from it and that they move forward and can earn that respect back. And maybe even a friendship develops 6 months, 1 month, 6 months, a year down the line. It also could be empowering for kids to separate out that, like, I think so much time when they're little, everyone has to be friends. We all have to like each other, and we force that a little bit. I think it's empowering a little bit for them to understand, oh my gosh, I don't actually have to like that person, but I don't get to be mean to them. Little kids, and as they grow and develop in their brains, able to be a little bit more abstract, that makes sense to them. They're like, okay, I get it. We don't all like everybody we interact with, but we don't, we choose to be kind to them and polite and treat them with dignity. We may not choose to go to dinner with them and spend extra time with them. So those are things. So I think it helps them understand that difference. And it also feels more authentic. This starts to feel more authentic than a forced sense of respect, a forced sense of everybody getting along. So this feels like an authentic and also my adult sees me. They understand that that person wasn't kind to me. They're not, sometimes you see that both sides have to apologize. Well, if one side was really kind of mean to the other side and the other side didn't do much, that doesn't feel safe and secure and trusting with that adult either. It feels like you're being forced to apologize for something that you really didn't need to do. Now, sometimes, in most cases, there's two sides to the story, and there's always a little background. But there are some times where that forced apology doesn't feel authentic. So again, that subtle shift of looking at it through the dignity lens can help empower kids and make them feel make it feel a little more authentic, and also trust. I feel like it helps them trust that you see a fuller picture of the social dynamics that they're navigating daily, that you get to say to them, I get it, I see that behavior, I don't think that kid's a bad kid, but I understand what you're saying, or that what they did wasn't a nice, kind thing.
Great. From what you say, everything you said, I was thinking that how helpful it would be, especially working with teenagers, or that we have a lot of different things to consider. How much it should help them to feel that they're not labeled. They're not labeled as bad students, bad kids, bad
Yes.
Classmates, bad friends. I think that these environments of dignity help students understand that a label does not represent you, and a behavior would not label on you and represent you
Forever.
forever.
Some kids,
Exactly.
absolutely. And I think we fall for that sometimes as teachers, and I know I've probably fallen on that trap before, like, oh, that kid just does whatever, or that kid, parents do, so I think I always laugh that my job helps me be a better educator and better things, because it forces me to practice a lot of what I preach. So I've been able to get away from those habits a little bit. Not always. I would say it's practice, not perfection. We're also human, just because we're the adults. But I agree. I do think it's really hard, in particular if you work in a smaller school. It's hard for kids to shake a label that they get, in particular when adults buy into it also. It's harder to shake that label. And so we're modeling in that moment, separating out the behavior and the child, and then not labeling. So you're actually helping. So maybe that kid doesn't have that permanent label attached to them.
Don't you think that these labels are a continuous source of bullying? I mean, they foster an environment where other students would continue on bullying. We will of course define what bullying is in a minute, but in my mind, these labels are the basis and the foundations for bullying a lot in school
Well, that's
environments.
that self-fulfilling prophecy. If you tell a kid they're going to be bad, if that's what they're going to rise to the expectation that you've set for them. I used to joke, my youngest daughter, when she was younger, was a little bit more rambunctious, and we kind of would joke, oh, like, she's the troublemaker. And finally we looked at each other and said, we need to stop saying that, or that's all she's going to be,
Of course.
forever. So it is. And sometimes we're doing it sort of innocently or jokingly, but you're right. It is setting up, if you say, well, that kid's a bully, then what else should they be? They're going to be what we tell them they are, especially at a younger age. So absolutely, I do think it helps to avoid those labels. And dignity helps steer away from that, because again, you're separating out the behavior from the person, from the human being that has inherent worth. Even the kid that does the bullying at first is still a child, and still has and value, and is still growing and learning. And we're there to help them through that piece.
I couldn't agree more, actually, to be honest. I've seen it happening so many times. Like, maybe, and at times, has this happened to you, that at times something starts like a joke, and all of a sudden it takes, a size and importance that no one would never be able to predict.
Absolutely.
Do you think we can define the terms now, so that we can all have the same vocabulary?
That'd be great.
To
And
continue
I have
our discussion
terms on that slide. So we'll go through all the terms a little bit. And we really think that it's important to get clear about words, because again, it's easy to misuse them, or, accidentally joke about something, and then it becomes bigger than it is. I think the first one is rude. So rude is unintentionally excluding, isolating, or hurting someone's feelings. And again, part of what I share often is that I have two teenage daughters, 18 and 16. So some of this I use them in reference to, because I've seen it in my own home. My younger one is very much of a focused on one or two friends. And I've seen rude behavior out of her, of not noticing her environment and that other people are around her. For the most part, I think it's unintentional, and I hope it's unintentional, but it feels great regardless to that other person, right? So even if it's unintentional, it still doesn't feel great to the other person. The next one is mean, which is intentionally excluding, isolating, or hurting someone's feelings. And I remember working in middle school sometimes, and a parent would call and say, my daughter was excluded at the lunch table or something. And, the kids would say, well, I was sitting with her at the table. What are you talking about? But you could see they would turn their back, to the person. And so they intentionally kind of were letting them sit there, but also that intentionally turning the back. I'm not going to talk to her. I'll let her sit at the table. So that's mean behavior that, again, can escalate on beyond. And then drama. I'm hoping I have these in order. Okay, drama is a conflict between people that is entertaining to everyone else. And I was thinking about this one, like an example for this one. We all know what drama is, and we use that term a lot. Oh, kids are just dramatic, which I also really dislike, that typically female students get labeled as dramatic, whereas I can guarantee that a lot of the drama that I experienced in middle and high school with students was from boys. But we have this narrative of that girls, girls, girls. But one of the things I think is an example of when when a girl and a boy, even into late high school, like each other, or they're talking, or whatever the term is they're using, the people around them talk about it so much, and it becomes entertainment, that often the drama it creates about just talking about the fact that they might like each other makes the two people not end up dating or wanting to be in a relationship, or boyfriend, girlfriend, or whatever it is, because the drama is entertaining to everybody else, but not to them. So it creates a conflict between the people, or it causes it. So that's more of that entertainment for other people's sake. Other people are interested in this potential relationship, and they make it kind of a conflict, and honestly make it end. But that actual conflict, this is really just a dictionary definition. It's a mental struggle resulting from incompatible or opposing needs, drives, wishes, or external or internal demands. When we have opposing needs, we sometimes aren't very generous with the other person. If our opposing needs are to both be best friends with John, we might go into conflict because we're not feeling that we're getting to that place. Oftentimes, conflict, we can think more on the world stage. If it's political, we have opposing needs or drives or wishes, we become in conflict. We can't make those because they're incompatible. It's right in there. So we go into this conflict, and we'll say that oftentimes the practical steps we'll go through at the end is started off as a conflict model. But we really think it's a communication model. It's expanded out, but it came from the idea of how do you resolve conflict, because conflict is one of those things that a lot of people weren't taught how to handle. Speaking personally, I was never taught how to handle it. And I used to get red-faced and teary. When I was in my early 20s and felt passionate about something or got in an argument, I was unable to have kind of a step-by-step rational conversation. I would get more upset and then want to walk away, because I think there was part of me that thought, maybe was I going to lose that friendship, or would that person not like me anymore if I spoke up too much? I don't know exactly what it came from, but I was really unable to handle that conflict. And I wasn't taught it. Honestly, until I got a little bit later, and starting to work with Cultures of Dignity was helpful for me on that front. All right, and the last one is the bullying, which is repeatedly abusing power against another person. And the last one I want to be clear on, because we often talk about at Cultures of Dignity, this is also where respect ties in, not only bullying of student to student. There's usually a power dynamic that's going on there. We avoid using terms like popular and whatnot, but we know that's the kid that's well liked, or maybe for what, not even maybe as liked, but holds some sort of power for some unknown reason, some intangible reason. And that's one of the things that one of my favorite lessons to do with kids is, it's called Getting Out of the Box. And it talks about what keeps you in the box, and it's the right clothes, the right hair, you play the right sport, typically you have money, it's all of these things that are stereotypical yet exist still today. So there's typically a power struggle going on there. And then you're abusing that power. If it's student to student, perhaps you're embarrassing a person every time they walk down the hallway. Maybe you're making fun of them online, all of those things. And it's continual. I would say that oftentimes when a kid is intentionally mean, maybe they post something mean one time about another kid, we jump to the phrase bullying right then. we push back a little bit and say, while that is not kind or treating somebody with dignity, that is really just mean. It is not bullying. Bullying, again, is that it's more intentional and over time. We also talk a lot about adults and kids, the abuse of power there. Adults can very subtly and easily bully children, sometimes without realizing it, but because of this whole idea of you respect me just because. At times, it can prevent kids from speaking up against abuses of power because it's an older person. It's an adult, it's a teacher, it's a coach. And we've seen a lot of stories, at least in the United States, about older, trusted adults that abuse power and kids not speaking up. And people often say, well, why wouldn't you? Or why did that child not feel comfortable? Well, think about how we've told our society, you respect your elders, and then often kids aren't believed. Kids are dramatic, they're exaggerating. Are you sure he looked at you that way? Are you sure this happened? So that's why that dignity piece of being able to stop, pause, think about the full picture, and take the pedestal off of the respect piece. Take that idea of, well, tell me the full story. That doesn't sound like the adult I know, but I really hear that you're upset, so tell me more about it. Treating their concerns or uncomfortableness with that. And I've talked to my own kids and students I work with. I've said, if something sounds odd, just come to me and tell me about it and we'll figure it out together. Let's just talk about it. Because I think when we shut it down of that person, that position of power cannot be challenged or questioned, that's where you see people in that power get away with a lot more than they should. So those are the terms. Bullying among kids, it's interesting. I would say that I've seen such a cycle of it. I felt like a lot of times in middle school, I would see it be within the same friend group. Sometimes it's holding that kid down in the friend group. The one kid is always the butt of the joke. The one person is always, or they decide they're finished with that person this week, and then it's another person the next week and whatnot. And then I more rarely saw just one kid that was odd or whatever it was that was off that other kids decided was not okay. I rarely saw that direct, I'm going to torture this kid because they're a nerd or whatever phrase they wanted to use. I didn't see that. It was more often within friend groups that where some sort of conflict happened and then it spun out of control a little bit, or there was some sort of, again, what was it? Incompatible needs were happening. Like, I want to be that boyfriend or that friend, stop talking to me because they're with you. So while I'm not going to say that across schools around the world that doesn't happen, where a kid that is maybe isolated or picked on just because they're odd or different, I'm sure that is happening. But what I see happen more often is really within that friend group of not understanding, kids not understanding how to speak up, say what they need, say, you can't treat me that way, being empowered to say, I don't deserve to be treated that way. So, well, those are how we define the terms. I think we were going to get into a different discussion. I feel like I'm getting on a tangent here.
No, that was very interesting. And I just wanted to, first of all, I wrote it in the chat as well, but people feel free to send your questions in as we speak, because I'm sure you will forget by the end. Carrie will share so many things with us that I'm sure you all won't be able to remember every question that pops up in your heads at the moment. But the one that I had as you were speaking is, are things black and white? Like, is it easy for teachers to spot, to examine a certain behavior and be like, okay, this is a mean behavior that's not bullying, or this is just conflict, it's not drama? I mean, is it so easy to categorize behaviors?
I don't think so. I don't think anything in education is easy, right? All picked a field that is harder. I don't think so. And honestly, who's to say that if they picked on you 3 times versus 4, when do we cross over into whether it's bullying or just being mean? So, no, I don't think it's easy. I think the reason we try to define the terms is because, well, I know the reason is because for a long time, bullying was the go-to. And sometimes if a kid wanted to get another kid in trouble, it's like, well, they bullied me, because they knew that was such a trigger word. So I would say that we err on the side of treating it like a conflict, because either way, you're going to hopefully go through a process to make it stop. And it is not black and white. I would often start with my kids of some of the things I would say to them is, what would the other child tell me? Like, is there anything I'm going to be surprised by that they would tell me? Because it isn't black and white. I remember vividly my first kind of incident. I just started my job and I was so excited to be the school counselor, and a girl came to me and just, crying. I mean, it was something civil, but crying, someone stole my pencil pouch and she was so upset, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I'm going to find out who did that. And that's just ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. So I spent probably an hour out of my day looking for this dumb pencil pouch, and she had found it and never came back and told me. And so in my head, I'm sitting here thinking, you wanted to go fix a problem. Now, it wasn't between kids or whatever, but it could have been if, I assumed some kid had done the wrong thing and taken it. But rather than kind of pausing and thinking about the whole story, well, where did you see it last? Hey, I'll go look for it while you go to class. Maybe it's in some, I really went to the assumption that someone had done something bad. And I was going to find the pencil pouch and figure out who the bully and the mean kid was. And that was a really good day for me to say, maybe I should try to investigate the whole story before I just assume the worst of the other side. That's also happened a million times. I got better at it, but when a kid would come in and tell me their story, okay, well, what happened yesterday? Like, you say it's happened out of the blue. Did anything happen yesterday or the past week? Well, I mean, I did tell their secret to their mom or to their friend and they were mad. Well, okay, that makes more sense why this behavior just came out of the blue. I do think, you got back to labels. I also think it's important that if a kid does have a label, does it mean that if they tend to lean to the bully side or whatever, it doesn't mean that we make that assumption when the story comes our way, because there's oftentimes that they are trying to make a difference and then we just, or change who they are and we shove them back into that spot. So
Yeah, I think we've
yeah.
all experienced that. We've all
Yeah.
experienced that.
Yeah, so I
And
don't
then you
think
feel so
right.
bad.
Yeah, I think it's using your gut instinct also sometimes. Or also I say things like, let me think about it, or who do you think we could also get involved in? I would go to my dean of students a lot because they were the disciplinarian. And I would say, hypothetically, if this was going on, and he would know that I was thinking something through. And I said, if I came to you with this, what would the steps be? And so I could talk to the students about, okay, this is going on. This is what's going to happen, to give them also the full picture. Because sometimes they do worry about, if they report something, it blowing up, because we as adults sometimes blow up the situation unintentionally. So I would say, let me figure out what the next steps are and what your choices are, to give them choice and empower them to make a decision. And then I would say to them, if this behavior continues at a certain point, it crosses over into bullying, and then I'm going to need to get involved. So I would give them kind of that heads up of like, let's see if we can work through it now while it's maybe lingering in this conflict mean area. But if it starts to escalate, then we're going to have to do something about it. And they seem to be pretty open about that most of the time. And sometimes it wouldn't escalate and sometimes it would. And they knew they would be ready, like, okay, can you help me now? Yeah.
Great. And what would you say are some misconceptions that people hold regarding these behaviors, all these types of behaviors we just mentioned?
Yeah. Well, we've talked about bullying kind of being overused. So I'd say that was the first one. And always, again, assuming you know the full story. But the other piece is not asking their opinion, which I touched on just a little bit. But a lot of times, I would try to do things in a couple of different ways. One would say, here's the potential of what could happen. I'd say we could work it out between us, and I'll try to give you some support and some language to use. Do you want to talk to the other student on your own with me around? And I said, or I can go to the dean of students if we feel that way. And I would be really honest with them and say, if you do nothing, nothing changes. And if we go to the dean of students, you probably will lose a little bit of control. You won't really have as much say in what happens. And all of those are okay. We can navigate all of those things. But letting them understand the full story and then asking their opinion, again, to a degree. There are times when you have to step in, and we know those times. Abuse, physical touch, all of those different things. We know when we have to step in, and they know that because we've been honest with them from the beginning. But getting their opinions, the other thing I would do is sometimes give them language. I'd say, well, have you tried saying this? And I said, or say this, but what is your language? Like I would say, I deserve to be treated better. That's the adult way to say it. Put it in your words for me. Like, what would that look like? And again, they're not going to be perfect. They're not going to get it right. But it's that whole thing of when you get in conflict with somebody and we think about what we want to say after, we hang up or walk away, trying to proactively let them practice a little bit, some language, giving them some language, but then making them turn it into we don't talk like they do, you know, so turn it into your own language. And I think sometimes we don't ask. Sometimes kids are harsher than we are with behavior incidences if we ask them. So sometimes they'd be like, "Oh no, I think that that person should be punished or not." So acting as if kids only want to get away with stuff or assuming that is not good. I think getting their and even student voice overall, I would say on a bigger, broader picture, having your student body, you know, having your student council or what student senate, whatever you call it, letting them participate in some of the rule making. Like we had students decide that they didn't want cell phones used in the dining room because they felt like that was the one part of the day where they could sit around a table and talk and not have their phones. So because students came up with that idea and uh, that concept, when we had to enforce it, kids didn't argue with us. They understood it. The rule made sense. It had a principle behind it. This is time together and whatnot. So even in that bigger picture, you know, sometimes we think we have to make all of the rules, letting them participate. And then also sometimes they understand why a rule doesn't make sense. They bring a rule to you and you say, well, here's why, because X, Y, and Z has to happen. And they're like, oh, I didn't know all those other pieces. And again, you get that buy-in from them, and then they're more willing to follow those rules. And again, it goes back to feeling safe in their environment as well.
Mm-hmm. Carrie, Chrysanthi has a question,
Okay,
I
great.
think.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
Very, very interesting things we heard up to now. So I just get notes. There are two questions I would like to ask. First of all, about the student counselor. Is that a role in the school that you've got? It's something that all schools have? Is it in Kentucky only? And the second one is whether you have seen any difference in the way students or adults react after those 2 years of being, with COVID and inside home and everything. Because we've seen, probably it's something that in all countries can be noted, but we've seen that there are more, let's say, of these types of conflict examples.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
No, that's a great question. The first question, yes. So in the United States, we have school counselors, and depending on public versus private, sometimes it depends on how much interaction you get with students. In public schools, you tend to be what we call like a registrar, like you help them switch classes and make sure they have that. And you might go in for a monthly meeting to talk about a concept, to talk about friendship or bullying or whatever it is. I was really fortunate. I worked at a private school and I got to teach class once a week or every other week to kids. And so I 6th through 8th grade when I was in the middle school, and then 9th through 12th grade. And as hard as it was sometimes, because it's not a graded class, you know, and I'm asking them to talk about things that they weren't super comfortable with, it was a really positive way for me to get some feedback on the social dynamics going on. And I was able to ask things kind of removed from them, like in the general, talk to me about social dynamics. And it was a great way to build trust. So I was the social emotional learning counselor. We also had a college counselor and a dean of students that did the discipline. So those were how the roles were divvied out. And then as far as yes, I mean, I think there's a huge difference with COVID. I'm on the board now of the school where I was, and I ran into the gentleman that was the dean of students with me, and my daughter was a senior this year, and we talked a lot about they got in a lot of trouble this year, more so than normal. And it was little things that were a little bit disrespectful to the school as far as they weren't listening or they were coming and going when they wanted to and things like that. Some of that, and he had such a great perspective for being kind of a disciplined guy. He still said, look, we haven't had these rules for 2 years. If they felt sick, they didn't come in. If they felt uncomfortable, they could do Zoom. We've been sort of loosey-goosey with some things. And then I do think we've also been, I will speak for myself. I know I became a less boundary-based parent in some ways because I felt bad. I was like, oh my gosh. And I was a very much like kind of talk to me, but I was on the more strict side because I could see all the bad things I was like, I see all the bad things at school. And I would say I lightened up on a lot of those, and maybe not all in the right ways, because I was like, gosh, they need to see their friends. They haven't gotten to see them. So I think we've confused kids a little bit. And I think they're also seeing us struggle with our own behaviors, or seeing teachers. My kids saw teachers cry sometimes at school because they were so stressed out, which is, I want them to know that teachers are human, and I'm okay with that. But that's new. They haven't always seen their teachers across the board struggling a little bit. A lot of the work that we've done in the past year has been mostly, we went from kind of a lot of student work to a lot of teacher work, because teachers were also needing some support with their social emotional learning and their health. I do think we'll keep seeing some, I think we'll see some of this for a little bit longer, a couple of years probably, because I do think kids have regressed in some ways. Our ninth graders never had a chance to be a seventh grader, where they got some of that behavior out of the way. And I do think when you're used to teaching ninth grade and they're acting like seventh graders, it throws us off. We don't always know how to respond in the best way because it's not typical ninth grade behavior. So I think we're having to adjust as teachers how we react and how we respond with kids that are not as mature. And I don't have like a magic answer of how do we fix it in the next, 6 months, or when school starts in a couple of weeks. I think it's going to be a learning curve for us. And I think I keep pushing with administrators to really provide you all, educators, with support, because you all are starting to become expected to understand all of this nuances and how to do it without a ton of training. And for some people, they felt uncomfortable doing social emotional learning stuff before COVID. And now you're just trying to keep yourself above water, and then expected to do it. So I think it's going to become part of curriculum at a younger age, which I would hope. Social emotional learning, teaching kids how to be, we call it emotionally granular. Understanding that frustration might be different than stress, which might be different than overwhelmed, which might be different than just angry. Those are all very different emotions, and helping kids figure those out. But I hope that answered it a little bit I don't really have an answer.
Carrie, we do have another question in the chat. So somebody wrote, Ibrahim wrote, as a parent, how do I instill courage in my 2 years old baby girl? That's a very, very young girl.
Yeah.
But I think some of the things that I suppose there are techniques that you can use to younger children as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I am not, I'm much more familiar with the age group of kind of 10, 11 on. That's what I worked with in a long time. I do have my master's in K through 12, but I would also say that courage is something that comes more naturally to some kids than others. And I also think it looks different in some kids than others. Using my own two daughters as an example, is my older is very courageous and will stand up and speak up when she sees something that she thinks is unkind or mean. My younger one is much quieter and a little more self-conscious about that, and will stand up in her own way. She might take a little bit of a break herself, or she might go to the other person that someone wasn't kind to and ask them to sit with her at lunch. She kind of does that subtle, supportive way rather than that big outspoken way. So I think 2 is hard to tell how they're going to, which direction they're going to go. But I would also just keep offering support of teaching them to speak up when something, you're asking for a lot because she's about to be 3, and then you don't want her to speak up for everything, because 3-year-olds, can be a little demanding. So be careful at that age. But I do think encouraging them from a young age that it's okay to speak up for what they believe in. And I also I would tell my kids over and over again, we can figure it out together. Just come to me and we'll figure it out. I never said you'll be in trouble. My older was followed to school one day by a man that was creepy indeed. He was arrested later for some things. And she was in middle school, and we live about a block and a half. So she walked herself. Lots of people kind of saw this man and weren't 100% sure if they should be concerned or not. And so I was shocked at how many people hadn't talked to their kids, but I talked to them a lot. We live in a neighborhood that is lovely and nice and all those things, but it's also very close to a place that's, there's some interesting characters. And so we've had lots of conversations. So again, I said, trust your gut instinct. and we could talk about it. But then I also went the other side. That's more rare I went the other side of saying, and when you're at a friend's house, and I would say, I don't care if it's your dad, your best friend's brother, their uncle, whatever it is, if somebody makes you uncomfortable, says something, does something that makes you uncomfortable, talk to me about it. Let's figure it out together. Because sometimes maybe it's just an older person making a really corny, bad joke, that they don't understand it's inappropriate. Maybe they don't work with kids. They don't know kids. But sometimes it's something that is a red flag that maybe you're like, that's a little uncomfortable. And so I wanted to put it out there from an early age so that if, and maybe you don't have to go that extreme at 2, obviously, but you could start saying, well, if your friend hurt your feelings, let me know why. Because sometimes your friend hurt your feelings because you actually wanted the toy and they were playing with it. And it was you being, it was you kind of being unreasonable at that age. So maybe say, well, I hear you and I understand that, but we do have to let your friend have a turn. And if you let her have a turn, then she will let you have one later, kind of little tips like that. But I do think you want to be careful of not forcing a younger child to act a certain way that might go against their personality that you may not know yet. And I think the best way is just encouraging the conversation, is say, I'm here for you. If you want to stand up, let me know. And then through them letting you know situations that make them uncomfortable, you can kind of gather how they react to things. And then you can kind of give that advice for the next time. All of this is learning. I don't handle conflict great now, even. I think I'm much better than I was, but I'm still going to mess it up at times. There's been times where I thought I heard something and I should have spoken up and I didn't. And there's been times I spoke up and I was wrong, so it's also navigating that. And I think when they just know that you don't, that they don't have to be perfect, I think that's maybe what all this is getting to, is letting them know they don't have to be perfect, that you respect their mistakes and other people's mistakes as well. That was a long way around. Sorry.
No, that was extremely helpful. And I was thinking as you were speaking that maybe for such a young child, maybe training them to recognize their feelings is a very good starting point.
Absolutely.
Elicit, like use questions to elicit, to make the child think and recognize their own feelings. Because sometimes what I've heard in schools is that something happened in the restrooms, and then the child would come the next day and say, I only realized that I felt like this when I returned home.
Yes. Yeah.
And this time sometimes is very valuable time, like it's time that students feel very bad about situations that they experience in the school. So for such a young child, that you could, of course, you work with very basic kind of emotions, like, are you happy? Why are you happy? Are you upset? Why are you upset? So you try to train your child to recognize their feelings as fast as possible.
And not trying to move them through. I think parents, a lot of times their kids are crying and they're like, well, come on, let's get over it. Let's move on. Let them kind of live in that for a minute, even if they just go to their room and let them cry for a few minutes. Let them be upset. If it's something upsetting, it's okay to be upset. It's sometimes we try to push them through that because it is hard when they're little to, it's hard to see them upset, or we want to move on, or we're at the grocery store and, all these things. But I do like that. Like we said, we call it emotional granularity, being able to identify different, there's probably some children books out there about, we have a tiny guide on it, we call them, but there are probably some great, it's been a while, but I'm sure there are some great books out there about emotions and probably standing up for things, because that is courageous. That's what takes courage.
Another very interesting question that takes us a little bit, do you think we should, let's answer this one, and then we can move on to the actual tools, and that these tools might help Ibrahim as well with how to help his little daughter. Zoe also asked something very interesting and very important nowadays. How much can cyberbullying affect teenagers compared to the traditional form of bullying? What should we do as teachers when something like that happens to a student, to one of our students? We see it happening more and more often, to be honest.
I mean, the sort of sarcastic answer is like, I hate those. I wish we just get rid of the internet completely. It's such a tough question. I get this question all the time, and I always hate it in some ways because it's so tricky and I don't have a magic wand for it. So I think that they can affect kids equally, and in some ways cyberbullying more, because it is nonstop. Once it kind of gets on that, there's 20 different quotes. Now, at the same side, I have also seen a lot of kids, it's more comfortable for them to stand up. And when they see a post that someone's making fun of it, you see a lot of times in the comments, knock it off, that's not nice. So you also get to see that. Although we all know that we tend to hang on to the negative comment, even if, even if 3 people said something negative and 10 people said something positive. I will say, as a side note, I did have a group of girls a couple years ago, seniors, that made an effort, which I think is a great idea. And we suggested to our kids and they've sort of followed it. But, a lot of times girls post things about how pretty someone is online, or you look gorgeous or hot or whatever it is. They decided to stop posting that way and commenting that way. They decided to start saying, they said something like what was it? Your intelligence is radiating or something like that, or your inner beauty is showing through. And they made this conscious effort to do it amongst their group of friends, and they loved it. They said it made them feel better about themselves in general. And it wasn't so focused on your pose and you're this and you're that. And so that, I mean, as a side note, that was something, and I suggested to a few other kids, and not everyone picked up on it, but this girls really did say it helped. So I think that the hardest part about cyberbullying, to be honest, is it used to be something that you could monitor a little bit because it was so public. But now that they have found ways with Snapchat and whatnot, it makes it a lot harder to catch it. Or for some, I mean, I know people screenshot it and can bring it in and show you what happened. And I do think it's a hard place for educators to be. We used to try to draw a line of and that was 4 years ago, so I'm not sure how they're treating it now, but if it came into the school day, if it trickled in, if the emotions and the behavior, if kids were talking about it at the lunch table and it was continuing, then we felt like we could intervene or say something, at least draw it to parents' awareness. I do also think you treat it the same way. I think you talk, and this actually does lead right into SEAL, but it leads into the idea of how do you confront someone, and I used to encourage kids not to confront back online, because I felt like, or even a text sometimes, because then they're with their friends and like, look what she said. Could you believe that, Yeah. So it's also people's comfort level, though. You've got kids that are not comfortable confronting somebody face to face. So it is a really sticky, windy road. I do think, again, this is where you give kids options. You talk to them about the potential consequences. I could tell you that if you text something, that can be used against you later. So either you have to make sure what the text says, be very clear and very basically like, don't threaten or do any of these things. You have to say, please stop doing X, Y, and Z to me. Thank you. Keep it very simple. You can confront them face to face. I think going with what the kid feels comfortable with, because asking them to do something that makes them feel uncomfortable, again, is taking that power away from them again. They already feel powerless, and now we're putting them in this other situation where they don't feel strong enough or that they have control. So a lot of times for me, it was more important for me to let them feel in control of the situation, even if it didn't resolve it immediately, to give them that sense back a little bit than resolving the situation quickly. And that is probably a preference on what people feel like as an educator, what they feel more comfortable with. But I would land on the edge of they feel like they have no control. And honestly, that came from my experience with sexual abuse, of when someone is a victim of sexual abuse, they get to decide when, if, and how they report it, because they've already had so much control and power taken away from them that we give them that power and control back. So I'd had a few cases that I had to work with that felt really hard for me to not report or go crazy or do these things that I wanted to do, that my educator, parent, mama instinct kicked in, but I had to respect that that was not good for their mental health or their process. So being able to transfer that a little bit into the bullying piece also is, some of it is you feel out of control because you don't know what you're going to walk into every day. So I don't have a magic answer of how to, but we could go into SEAL now and talk about these steps of how to handle conflict. Do you want me just to roll right into that? Yeah.
Yes, please. Yeah,
Okay.
and I'm sharing the slide as well, because this is a very useful tool for people.
So we had it's a lesson. It's one of our sessions in our curriculum, Owning Up, and it's an acronym, which I recognize can sometimes be off-putting to students when you use an acronym. And so I would always acknowledge that. My goal in the United States, sometimes school counselors were considered or are considered cheesy or old, or they're out of touch a little bit. So I was always very wary of using anything that felt super silly or too mature. So we use this process called SEAL to deal with conflict. And I would come into it very much, and depending on the grade, it would depend on how I presented it. If they were older, I wouldn't call it SEAL and put the big thing up there. I would just say, let's talk about these steps of how to handle conflict. If they were younger and they wouldn't roll their eyes at me too much, I would put the SEAL up there and go through each step. So the SEAL is, the S is for stop. Stop is, we say breathe, listen, think, when, where, now, or later. This really just means, and the example I always use, if someone says something, if I'm with 3 of my friends and I insult Natasha and she's alone, is that the best time for her to speak up and tell me to be quiet or shut up or whatever kids say? Probably not, because I'm with 3 of my friends. So my first reaction is going to say, well, lighten up. I was just kidding. You can't take a joke. You're so intense, all of these things. Now, it also could be the best time if you just say, oh, shut up, and you walk away. There's different scenarios, but you kind of go through, like, stop, think about it. Is this the best time to do it? It's not always the best time in a big group because it can escalate. But there are some times where you can say, I used to tell my kids sometimes, like, you know what, this kid's being a jerk. You can use some bad language if you need to. I'm not going to get in the hallway. And if you use it, my own children, not students, I would have to walk that line a little bit. And if you're going to get in trouble for that, that's okay. You'll serve a detention or whatever it is, but it's okay if in that moment it's what you assess would help nip this in the bud. So stop, breathe, listen, kind of evaluate where you are. Now, this is also really hard to do when someone says something to you, and I am very clear that all of these steps are hard to do. When someone says something to you in a moment, it's hard for you to think. I mean, we have the word think in there. That's really hard to do in that moment. A lot of time it's just react. But we say that this whole process, this is a process, and it's about practice and not perfection. If you can just accomplish one of these steps, you're winning. You're making progress. So the next one is explain. So when you decide it's time to talk, then maybe you say, you know what, I don't want to confront them then, but I'm going to text them later and say, hey, could you stay after class for a minute tomorrow to talk, or can I call you later? Whatever it is. Explain what happened that you don't like and what you need instead. To be clear, to say things to another teenage kid of, like, you're mean to me all the time, or you're always mean, or something like that, they can say, well, no, I gave you a pencil yesterday in class. I'm not always mean to you. So you have to be specific. What happened? They're like, I don't like that you called me a butthead as I walked down the hallway yesterday in front of all your friends and laughed. I would prefer you just leave me alone. It doesn't have to be like, I prefer you to be my friend, because that is probably asking a lot, and that's too idyllic. What we want to say is, I just prefer, just leave me alone if you're not going to be nice to me. I don't care. So kind of explain what happened that you don't like specifically, and then what would you prefer instead? Again, even if you only do the explain what you don't like part, that's a step in the right direction. You can add on that what you need instead later. So we're talking about trying to figure out this in pieces. And the next one is affirm. So affirm and admit. Affirm, like, you don't get to treat me that way, and I won't treat you that way. This is where that dignity comes in. We both deserve to be treated with dignity. I'm trying not to retaliate. I'm trying to approach you in a way that lets you know what's going on. And then admit is the part of if you had anything to do with it. Maybe you shoved them the day before, and so that's why they called you a butthead in the hallway, or maybe they heard you talking about them somewhere. And so if there was a part that you played in it, this is the time to say, you know what, I know I was a jerk last week, and I totally get why you did that. But let's affirm, kind of moving forward, that let's just not talk to each other like that. Let's, again, go back to, like, let's leave each other alone. Let's just treat each other with dignity. Let's not put each other down. Now, you can go through these processes with them, and you can give them a scenario if you want. They can give you a scenario. And again, I'm giving some language that they probably wouldn't use. They're not going to say, I'm going to affirm that you deserve to be treated with dignity. A 12-year-old is not going to say that to another 12-year-old. So then you turn it on them. How would you say that? Dude, I'll leave you alone if you leave me alone. Oh, great. If that is how it looks in your language, and you start every sentence with dude, awesome. At least it's in your language. So going through that process. And then the last one is lock. And it means lock in the relationship, lock it out, or take a pause. This one can be a little complicated for younger kids in particular, because they hear lock it out and they think, oh, I'm going to ignore that kid on the playground. That's, again, it's not what it means. It means lock it out. It means, like, we're just not going to be friends right now. And or you know what, maybe we're never going to be friends again. But again, we're going to treat each other with dignity. Lock it in means, like, okay, we're going to take a step forward. We're going to repair this. We're working on it. And then take a pause says, you know what, let's just take a breath. and maybe we need a minute, and maybe we'll come back together naturally, and maybe we won't, and that's okay, but we're going to take a pause. This is sometimes how I would start when kids would come to me with a conflict. Sometimes I would say, when I'm walking them through, but I'm not talking about SEAL, I'd say, what do you want the end result to be? This person's been mean to you. You don't like what they've done, or you feel like they didn't invite you to the party this weekend. If you confront them, what is the result you're looking for? Do you want to just tell them that you want to be friends again? Are you trying to resolve it? Are you so mad at them and you're sick of this behavior, so you want to be done? Like, what is your end result? And then we can kind of go backwards, back up to stop. Okay, well, great. When is the right time to do it? All right, what do you want to explain that you don't like? Because now we know the end result. So sometimes I would work backwards, in particular with older kids that could, think that abstractly and kind of go backwards to the beginning. And so, I mean, sometimes I would joke with colleagues. I'd be like, okay, I have to seal you for a minute. Could you not let your kids out 10 minutes early because they're coming in my room and blah, blah, silly things like that. But we would open it up with that phrase. Again, it is a tricky thing with kids, depending on how kind of cynical they are about some of this stuff and how receptive they are at the time. With the older kids, I would take all the orange things basically off. And I would just say, okay, let's talk about some steps. How should we walk through conflict? And we would just walk through it. Or when they were maybe upper, middle, lower high school, I would put it up there and they watch them roll their eyes and say, okay, tell me what you don't like about this. What doesn't work? And honestly, forcing them to do that made them be like, well, I guess maybe it is better to think about it than to do it right then. Or yeah, I guess I have to be specific. So they eventually would agree to pieces of it because I let them kind of poke holes in it. And sometimes in the first 3 to 20 times I taught it, I probably did a horrible job because I had to get used to how to explain it to them so that they would buy in on it. So this, again, is not only, I think this is one of those, not only a process for them to learn, but a process for us to learn how to teach it to them and how they'll respond to it. And we all know that each year is different. Your 6th graders one year might love it, and the next year they might hate it, and everything in between. So it's getting your comfort level with teaching it helps no matter how they respond to it. Helps you kind of with that. I'm trying to think of anything else I forget with SEAL. Are there any questions about SEAL? Because just it's so we've stopped calling it a conflict resolution, more, just it's really how to have a hard conversation, kind of. How do you walk through a hard conversation?
Sophia is also, she's not asking a question, but she's making a very valuable point there. She says, I think that it is important that parents also be aware of these steps so that they can support the process at home.
Yes, parents, that's I feel like that's a whole nother hour, because sometimes as much as they're supportive and wonderful, we do tend to think that our own children can do no wrong. My kids joke, they're like, will you please take our side once? Because I've been that counselor head, I'm always like, well, what did you do? Like, please just take my side one time. I do think it's hard sometimes for parents to see the other side when their kid is hurting. And I think we also have to remember, kids that are acting out, whether it's bullying behavior or just being mean, there is most likely something going on for them as well. Maybe they aren't getting the support at home or they need. Maybe they're just trying to get attention. Sometimes kids get attention through negative attention because it's just attention. They don't care how they get it. And so trying to be empathetic to that other side, even if they aren't the greatest kid in that moment, what do they need? I had a guy that talked one time, I'm drawing a blank. He was an ADHD expert, and he said, people say kids are, people blow it off, say this kid just needs attention. Well, let's give it to them. Like, why are we like, if that's what they're telling us what they need, why are we fighting that and making it worse? And sometimes they might need that attention, the kid, and it might feel counterintuitive because it's the kid that was acting up. But if it helps them not continue to act up, then that's exactly what they need at that time. So yeah, parents, it would be good with parents too.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Carrie, do you, when students, like, you teach the SEAL method, you go through it, they say they agree with some aspects of it, they seem to ignore or roll their eyes on some of the other aspects. What do you do when they don't do it? when they're upset
Yeah.
and they're teenagers and they don't follow any of those instructions and things escalate.
Yeah. And that's the hardest part, right? I mean, about this stuff, about social emotional learning. I used to say my class is not a 2 + 2 = 4 class, which was hard sometimes. There wasn't this like stamp of approval at the end that you pass the test and you get straight A's. I used to tell kids, because they'd say, well, why sometimes, why do I take this class? It's not for a grade. I could be having a study hall and all these things. Because my school was a very competitive prep school and college preparatory school. So we would talk about that. These are things just to think about, even if you're not perfect at them or do them. We would revisit them, because I was lucky enough to have them more than 1 year sometimes. And I want you to think about it. You might not walk out in the hallway and do it tomorrow, but maybe in a week, when you realize what you're doing isn't working, you might try part of it. And this is like, I still am not great at all of the steps, but I'm getting better at the stop. I used to get fired up fast. I'm getting better at stop, think, and I've always been kind of good about the explain part, but the other pieces were falling into place. So I think, well, that's one thing that I talk a lot about, is also the modeling. So modeling, letting them know that you're not perfect at it. Because I do think kids sometimes think that the adults, we have everything put together. Yes. And I used to tell them, because again, I live so close to home, that sometimes I would forget my computer, because I would bring it home, and I would be very obvious about it, because I want them to know that even adults I'd be like, oh my gosh, you guys, I had to get a computer from the library because I forgot mine. So that's like, you guys, I'm teaching this conflict resolution. Conflict is still hard for me. We have a lot of sections in our book we call Check Your Baggage. And it's like, think about how you handle conflict before you teach this lesson, so that you can be open and honest with them about the steps, about it. You're not perfect. And so I don't think you get upset about it. I think maybe if they come back and they tell you about a situation, be like, well, do you think SEAL would have helped at all? Is there any part of that you could have done in that moment? And maybe let them think about it. Be like, okay, could you go back and try it now? I don't think we can, and you weren't suggesting this, but kind of beat kids up for not using the tools we're trying to give them. They're still kids and they're going to learn some of it on their own, but reinforcing, talking about it, acknowledging that it's a process. We're not asking you to be perfect. We're just try. How about try stop? Try that. Explain to me what you didn't like about that situation. So at least they're explaining it in their own words, and they're explaining it to someone. Then they have it in their head. They've articulated it to someone, so it gets a little bit easier next time. And that's why sometimes I walk through the process with a kid in the office with me if we're talking about something, because it's that it's like the taking notes when you want to make a point. It's in your head. You've already thought it through once, so maybe it'll come out. And then they're also changing and growing and going through so much. They're not going to do a lot of these well. We're hoping that it's going to sink in and think about it and become a process that they become adults eventually that do it better than a lot of the adults that a lot of us, had that chance.
Hopefully.
Yeah. We'd have to wait till 50 to get there, like I didn't have to wait till 50 to be good at SEAL. I could have maybe done it at 25.
Yeah, perfect. And they need it, like with the way they, according to our predictions, right? The universe, they are with the online life and the offline life and the remote work life.
Yeah.
And all of these realities they're going to face. They need to be good at conflict. I suspect.
And I think it's also about when their maturity and what you've taught them connect eventually, it gets easier. They start to do it. But sometimes we're asking them to do these things that are, I used to get really frustrated with teachers. They'd come in and they'd say, oh my gosh, this kid, a racial comment came up. And not that I think those are okay ever, but at the same time, and the kid didn't stand up or he didn't handle it perfectly. And at the same time, there's been instances where at a team meeting, somebody said something that made someone uncomfortable and the adults didn't speak up. So we have this expectation that kids are going to have behaviors that we ourselves, again, don't possess. Not only conflict resolution, but being socially courageous. We are not always that way. So that's an opportunity, rather than getting mad at the kid, say, let's talk about that. You SEAL yourself. Let me stop, because sometimes it triggers us because we hear a comment, we get really mad. Let me stop and explain why I was frustrated. So I heard that comment and I'm frustrated because that comment means X, Y, and Z to me. Can you tell me like what your intent was behind that comment? And then you can affirm, okay, I was about to get really mad and condescend to you that you should know better and you should be a better person on all these things that, again, attaches the behavior of the person. You should be shameful that you said that, which is not really what we want. Because when we attach shame to it, then they don't bounce back from that as well. Hey, I don't think that's what you meant. Can you tell me, or can I tell you why when you said it, it meant something different than what you thought? Okay, let's move forward. I want to lock in this relationship. So you're not saying it all exactly that way, but that's a way also to use seal as an adult with a kid when you have a conflict with them or when they trigger you, because there are times when they can say something that gets you fired up quickly, and they may not know that why you got so mad so quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really like in that kind of approach. I really like that you don't. But sometimes I feel that when we are with students, sometimes their behavior, our reaction to their behavior, is as if everything is done. You said it. You can't take that back. You can't turn back time. You will get punished and labeled in my brain. I go back again to this idea of labeling. You will be labeled, in your example, in my brain as a racist.
Yeah.
And you can't take that back.
Yeah.
So I really like with SEAL that you give your students the opportunity to, because who hasn't, like even me, I'm 35, I sometimes say things that I mean in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm like, that didn't sound the way I intended it to.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine, I mean, I don't want to be labeled in the brains of my friends as XYZ. I guess that this happens more often to a teenager. And sometimes their attention is to say the joke, to make the class laugh, to be likable, they don't understand that,
you miss a growth moment. You miss a growth moment for them if you just go straight to the shame and label rather than the explain. While I mean, I think dignity, and I had actually the American school in Ghana, they were amazing. The woman said the dignity has really helped me with, as we're talking about it, reframe my discipline. Because discipline should be done through the lens of dignity so that people, I mean, because I really think that restorative discipline is important, because how do you bring somebody that hurt the community back into the community, let them genuinely apologize and build back and try to earn people's respect again? So how does that happen? And dignity, I think on both sides, that even the kid that was in the wrong still deserves to be treated with dignity. And they're much more likely to change their behavior if they're treated that way and to understand why.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, if we start at an early age, we hope that later on in the, coming years, when they go to middle high school and senior high school, they will have learned some.
Yeah, we hope so. Yeah.
Some
That's always the goal. Again, progress, not perfection. Yeah, hopefully.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I know that, sometimes when you're in the situation and something very serious has happened, it is maybe a little bit hard to pose and control yourself as a teacher, I mean. Or when you hear about cyberbullying, then it comes, because with cyberbullying, another thing I wanted to say earlier when the colleague mentioned it is that sometimes cyberbullying take us, I mean, as we are surprised, because you don't see it happening in your classroom, you don't see it happening in the school cafeteria, whatever. You just wake up one morning and you see comments and screenshots of behaviors of students that you wouldn't necessarily expect them to behave like that. So there's a matter of surprise there for us to handle as well.
Well, and it's so different from what most of us experienced growing up. Also, you're like, you did what? Because we just didn't have that capability. And again, I do think, to your point, some of the kids that are the most savvy at doing it are the kids that are also the most savvy in talking to us. And so we get a little surprised. We're like, but they seem like such a nice kid. And I used to joke that well-bred and nice are different. Just because a kid can say thank you for the class and all these things because they've been well-bred and been taught to be polite is different than being nice. And I genuinely think most kids are nice. Probably the 99.9% are really good kids that are going through something at a certain point in time. There's rarely that I've come across a child that is just mean for mean's sake. And so I also think that's helpful to keep in mind of, God, they got themselves in a hole that they could not. Maybe they made one comment and then they felt like they had to stick there by their guns, and then people chimed in. And yeah, I mean, I do think overall with students, it is, I love kids. So it's like being empathetic with how much harder it is to grow up a little bit now. I think it's hard every time to grow up, but they do have a lot more, even without COVID. The technology and stuff that we all kind of make jokes about at a certain, well, I'm grateful I didn't have, nobody recorded me doing anything when I was
Of
15.
course.
You know, we always make those comments, but it's true. I mean, yeah, it's true. They've got a lot of thinking at all times going on.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. I will ask for one more time for people. If you have any questions, guys, please, this is the time to unmute and ask the question or leave it in the chat for Carrie to answer. And let's see. I'm so sorry the poll app didn't work. I don't know what happened there.
It's okay. Technology, you know, it's just.
Technology betrayed me a little bit there. Okay, we do have one more. Based on your experience, how possible is it that the person that bullies in school continues to bully as an adult as well? How do people that bully socially evolve as adults? Is this something that can long-term affect them? That's a very good question.
That's a great question. I think the answer is yes and no. I mean, I believe and I hope that I feel like if kids are kind of shepherded through that, like if they say they are a bully in middle and high school, but they're able to have trusted adults in their life that hold them accountable, but also let them grow and change, that they will grow and change. I think if they're not kind of held accountable, or if they're held accountable too extremely, you know, if someone goes too harshly and then they're like, well, I was just doing X, Y, and Z. So I think it could be either extreme, but I think, again, treating them with dignity through the process, talking to them. And I do think parents play a role in this. Like if parents let their kids be held accountable, that's helpful. Sometimes parents don't want the kids to suffer any pain at all or any consequences, which we all know is how you learn. But I think if we turn a blind eye or let kids get away with it, it's hard for them to get out of those habits because they get what they want. You know, they're not able always to see that maybe not through the means that are really probably what they want. But I do think helping kids understand why that type of behavior is hurtful, harmful, or not treating somebody with dignity helps them in the long run develop that bullying isn't the only way. Now, do I think that, like I was just saying before about courageous as a personality type, about how someone handles it, you know, with the 2-year-old we talked about, I also think that there are people that are naturally more aggressive or more, you know, the people that say like, I just know what I want and I ask for it. I do think that we could label those adults as bullies sometimes, and maybe it is, but maybe it's also because we haven't learned how to talk to someone that talks to us that way. So there's all kinds of nuances there, but I do think even creating a trusting relationship and even that bully being seen, heard, and validated helps them outgrow that as their main way to interact with people. And I do think we have to hold kids accountable. Sometimes people say when we say that we let kids, we talked about this on the podcast briefly, we talk about kids in 3 different ways: spectrum of attitudes, objects, recipients, and resources. We do objects as fire drill. Get outside, get in line. We need to keep you safe. They're an object. Get outside. We're not talking to you. This isn't a discussion. Participant, classroom, back and forth conversation. They're learning something. Or recipient, I'm sorry. They're receiving some information, maybe asking questions, all this stuff. And then resource is when we let kids be a resource. We let them be the experts of their own lives. Sometimes teachers at first, when they hear me say that before they have much context, think that we're saying let kids rule the roost. Absolutely not. We have to have rules in schools. There have to be some sort of, you know, control to the chaos. At the same time, those rules need to make sense. They need to be based in principles, and letting kids give suggestions or talk to you about it or whatever also helps you get their perspective and vice versa. So I think using kids, even the bully, as a resource and asking them and letting them be part of the conversation helps them feel, again, seen, heard, and validated, so that maybe they understand that there's a different way to do things.
Carrie, on a similar kind of question, did you ever have somebody who would insist on bullying somebody else just despite the fact that you did all you could do to change the dynamics there?
I did not. I mean, but I can't say that, like, I couldn't say across the country or the world that someone has, that hasn't happened. I mean, we see the teenage movies all the time where that happens repetitively. I always saw it, and again, I'm also the glass half full person, so I always saw kids evolve and change because I think that's what they do. Did they become perfect human beings by the end? Absolutely not. But I used to laugh. Some of the meanest boys in middle school were like my favorites by 12th grade.
Mhm.
Did I
That's
also
true.
not love them sophomore year? Usually, yes. But by senior year, the conversations and the perspective that they were able to give back sometimes was really amazing, that they could say, you know what, I was a jerk. I was not nice. And I don't know why. Sometimes it's like, I don't know why. I just did it.
Yeah,
So for the most part, no, I saw kids evolve for sure.
perfect. This workshop lasted more than we had planned to because these discussions were very, very, very interesting for all of us. I will probably, I would suggest that we stopped somewhere here, but we are always at your disposal for any questions you might have in the future. I mean, you do have my email address, Carrie. You can share your email address with the people in the chat. And that's Philip, that's an amazing question. And I have been thinking about it quite a lot recently. Philip is asking, what about bullying in the workplace as a teacher, like
Yep.
bullying to the teachers? This is another an hour and a half of a workshop. There are techniques, like I've done some research recently because I was interested in the topic. There are some techniques that teachers can apply, both in cases that they're bullied by students or by colleagues or parents, I mean adults or students. We can This is what Carrie said earlier, that we need to be trained in social emotional learning because we do face the same problems sometimes. We do need the same tools in reality as adults. We were not lucky enough to be offered these types of tools growing up. Some of us in some areas of the world, maybe others had been luckier, but we certainly need the skills. Bobby says as well, to piggyback of what Philip said, how does bullying among educators impact bullying in schools?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, not that we don't have time to answer all of these big questions, but I would say the first question is, I think you need administrative support. If a parent is bullying you or another teacher, you need to either be empowered by that administrator to stand up for what you need, or for them to support you by standing up on your behalf through either some sort of seal process or something. My administrators, for the most part, if it was a parent in particular, were completely okay if that parent needed to leave school. If that student, even though we were a tuition-based school, they said if this is what's happening, I think the quote one of them said was addition by subtraction. Removing that type of parent from the student body is actually better for other parents to come. And then the second part of that question, I just completely forgot because I was thinking of it. How does bullying educate? I mean, kids know, they see us more than we think they do. I mean, it 100% makes it worse for the kids because we went through a brief phase where some teachers were often at lunch kind of talking about kids, and kids knew they were. And, I had to say something to the adults of, you're not demonstrating or modeling what we want them to do. And then we're mad at them when they're acting like so it absolutely affects the kids. So there does have to be, being an educator, you are held to a little bit of a higher standard, of because kids are watching you at all times. We could talk a whole other thing about venting versus gossip also. Sometimes it's okay to vent. It's okay for me to close my door, or when all of you guys get off, Natasha and I can kind of vent about something for a minute. But gosh, that was so hard on the technology, blah, 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 blah. Or so-and-so didn't raise their hand once, whatever you want to do, but it's just between us. It'd be different for me to call out Heather on this whole thing for something that she did or didn't do, in front of people, or Heather be the only one not here and me say something. And so there are those differences, but I do think adults have to recognize our kids are watching us at all times, and they see if we're doing that. And it definitely trickles down into if we think it's okay, they think it's okay.
It's a type of environment. If it gets fostered, students will escalate.
Yeah.
Yes, students will escalate.
Yeah.
And even body language, like students know when you're looking at your colleague and rolling eyes. They know, like they've noticed. At least one has noticed.
And sometimes people say something, I just never understood this, like, oh my God, they didn't go to carpool again or something. And it's, kids are right there. They don't need to even hear that. They should be thinking that everything is perfectly professional. So we make mistakes. It's okay if I say, oh my gosh, I totally forgot carpool this morning. I got distracted by a meeting. It's another thing if another teacher calls me out and makes it sort of a disparaging comment.
Mm-hmm. That's why we said that, we said earlier that cultivating environments of dignity is probably the answer to a lot of these questions, because you prevent before you actually have to address the problem. Okay. Thank you all very much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure and a privilege to speak to Carrie. Thank you a lot for all the participation, for asking questions, for participating in the meeting. Ibrahim, you are the last one who's raised hand. So with you, we are letting everybody continue their days. Ibrahim?
Yes. Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. I really want to appreciate, because I realize you are trying to wrap up the program. I want to appreciate you for this privilege. I am from Nigeria, and programs like this is not common in Nigeria. And that is why I am very thankful, and also I appreciate you. You see, when I got the link for this program, I sent the link to my fellow teachers in my school.
Mm-hmm.
So, and few of them, I could see them in this particular program. I could see them attending the program, and I really appreciate it. It will go a long way in assisting and instilling courage into our students. And it will also help us to figure out students who are affected in one way or the other. And we really appreciate you for this selfless service. May God reward you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We hope it was helpful.
Thank you for having me, Natasha. This was great. I love the interaction. We sort of debated about doing this chat kind of style, and I think it really lended itself well for people asking questions and able to get some content in there. So thank you for having me back. I loved the the podcast before, and this was great as well. And I'm excited to be near you in a couple days. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you very much for everything. We will have you again in the future, I suspect.
That was fun.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.